The most unsettling things are often hidden by the mundane. A slight misalignment, a silence that's too deep. For weeks after my brother's strange call, the old Victorian house felt heavier than usual, but it was only when I noticed the shadow beneath the attic door was gone that the comforting illusion of emptiness finally broke. Our narrator, Leo 40s, is a reclusive architect who has recently inherited his childhood home in a quiet, forested suburb following the death of his estranged father. The house is a sprawling, slightly neglected Victorian filled with echoing hallways and shadows. Leo's brother, Marcus, who lives nearby, frequently checks on the house and insists it is completely empty and secure. The emotional tone is one of creeping paranoia and deep familial distrust, centered on a specific, inaccessible space within the house. The afternoon was bright, filling the empty rooms of the old house with pale, relentless sunlight. The air inside was cool, dry, and tasted faintly of plaster and dust, the scent of long-settled quiet. I was moving through the house methodically, a digital camera cold and heavy in my hand, documenting every corner for the imminent sale. It was a sterile, necessary act of inventory, turning a lifetime of memory into a commercial transaction. I had finished the main floor and moved to the staircase, ascending slowly. Each step on the worn oak stairs was a low, familiar creak that felt like a quiet conversation with the past. The house had always been a passive repository, a shell of the life my family had left behind. The second-floor landing was a wide, square space dominated by a tall, arched window that looked out over the dormant garden. This was the final frontier, the access point to the attic. The attic held the true, deep silence of the house, the remnants too painful, too odd, or too heavy to be discarded. My older brother, Marcus, had managed the property since our mother's passing 6 months ago. He was cautious, pragmatic, and meticulous to a fault. His primary assurance, repeated often during our phone calls, was that the house was secure and untouched, every door locked, every window latched. He had prepared it perfectly for the transfer to the realtor. I stood on the landing, raising the camera to capture the wide sweep of the hallway. The light from the arched window was bright, spilling over the floorboards. My eyes moved to the attic door. It was a simple, heavy door, set into the wall at the back of the landing. It opened inward toward the stairs. My gaze fixed on the bottom of the door. Normally, there was a thin, persistent line of light visible beneath it. The attic under the eaves was riddled with small structural gaps and air vents, always allowing a faint, diffuse illumination to spill out onto the landing floor. It was a subtle, comforting sign that the space above was just dusty, empty air. Today, that thin line of light was absent. The gap between the wood and the sill was perfect, uniform, and absolutely dark. No light escaped. The space beyond was sealed, opaque. I walked slowly toward the door, my footsteps now unnervingly quiet on the heavy rug. I reached out and put my hand on the cold brass knob. I turned it gently, expecting the familiar, soft thunk of the lock engaging and the door pulling open inward. The knob turned freely, but the door didn't move. It was immovable. I pressed against the heavy wood. It was solid, dense, and yielded nothing. A sharp, chilling realization hit me. The door was barred from the inside. A bar, a bolt, a wedge. Some physical obstruction had been placed against the door to prevent it from opening toward the stairs. The simple, quiet fact of the absent shadow was a direct, terrifying contradiction of Marcus's repeated assurances that the house was secure and untouched. Marcus was meticulous. He would never have left the house with the attic door open or barred. The house suddenly transformed. It was no longer a passive relic of the past. It became a present, active, and hostile space. The silence in the hallway was immediate, suffocating. The air that had felt dry and settled now felt thick, charged with intention. Someone had been here since Marcus left. Someone had gone into the attic. And someone had taken definitive physical action to seal the space, to turn the attic into a vault or perhaps a prison. I pulled my hand away from the cold brass knob, the camera forgotten at my side. My skin felt cold, despite the sun streaming through the landing window. The question was a low, insistent drumbeat in my mind. Who would secretly secure the attic and why? It couldn't have been a simple break-in. A burglar wouldn't lock themselves inside a final room. It suggested familiarity, purpose, and a desire to hide something or someone within the deepest memory of the house. The silence around me felt like a deliberate lie. The attic, the quiet space above, was no longer empty. It held a secret that was actively, physically guarded. The faint scent of dust and plaster was now mixed with the sharp, unsettling odor of present danger. I looked up at the dark, sealed door. The complete absence of shadow beneath it, an absolute confirmation that the passive grief of the last 6 months was about to become a desperate, active search. The attic was locked and the key was on the inside. I retrieved the camera, my hand steadying with a sudden cold resolve. I took a photograph of the attic door, capturing the stark, unnatural darkness beneath the sill. It was the last picture I would take of the house as a simple property for sale. The house had revealed its hand. It was holding something. And to get to it, I would have to break not just a lock, but the careful, pragmatic piece Marcus had assured me was real. The silent, passive relic had become a mystery I had to solve. The call to Marcus was not a question. It was an accusation, delivered from the still, charged atmosphere of the second-floor landing. I told him, simply, about the absent line of light and the immovable attic door. The phone line crackled with the distance, but the sudden tension in his voice was immediate and palpable. "You're overthinking it, Leo," he said, his tone sharp, dismissing. "The house is old. The humidity has been terrible this season. The wood swells. It's a common issue with that vintage." I pressed him on the physical impossibility of the lock. "It's not just stuck, Marcus. The door is barred. It opens inward toward the stairs. Something is physically blocking it from the inside. And I can't even see a shadow of light." His response was a sudden, escalating wave of agitation. His voice rose, becoming visibly defensive and overly firm. He shifted immediately from pragmatic explanation to aggressive denial. He didn't ask questions, he issued demands. "I am telling you, Leo, you need to stop looking for trouble where there is none," he insisted. "You're turning a simple house sale into a melodrama. I handled this. It's finished." He demanded I leave the property immediately and wait for the real estate agent to handle any structural issues. The urgency in his voice was unnerving. It was less the exasperation of a practical older brother, and more the panicked command of someone desperately trying to halt a dangerous investigation. I steered the conversation back to the facts. "You told me you were last in the attic 3 days ago to check the roof vents. Did you leave the door unsecured when you left?" Marcus claimed with rigid certainty that he had inspected the attic personally just days ago. He described climbing the pull-down ladder, noting the dust, and finding nothing but dusty storage boxes and old holiday decorations. He painted a picture of absolute, mundane emptiness. But the certainty was brittle. Through the phone, I heard a slight, telltale tremor in his voice, a momentary break in his practiced composure that was more honest than his words. It was the sound of a man exerting maximum control over his own fear. I had known Marcus my entire life. His excessive, overly firm denial, combined with that barely perceptible tremor, told me everything I needed to know. My brother is either lying or deeply afraid. His insistence on the house being empty was not based on fact, but on a desperate, moral imperative. The question was no longer about a stuck door, it was about trust. Marcus, my pragmatic, reliable older brother, was actively deceiving me about the house. The house had revealed an active barrier. Marcus had supplied an active lie. The two facts formed a perfect conspiracy of silence. The internal conflict was immense. Why would Marcus, the person most interested in a quick, clean sale to maximize the inheritance, sabotage the documentation process by lying about a sealed room? The only answer was that what was sealed inside the attic was more valuable, or more dangerous, than the house itself. Why is Marcus so adamant about the house being empty? And what is he protecting? Protecting a secret. The attic likely holds a secret that directly compromises Marcus, the family, or the house's value. This secret could be related to our parents' lives, or perhaps something Marcus himself was doing in the house before my arrival. Protecting me, Leo, he might genuinely believe the contents are dangerous or painful, perhaps related to our mother's final days, and is trying to shield me from a trauma he already faced. His fear, however, suggests the danger is present, not historical. Covering his tracks. He may have been the one who physically barred the door. If he inspected the attic days ago, he had the perfect opportunity to enter, secure the space, and remove or hide something crucial before I arrived to document the sale. His immediate high-stakes reaction points to something active and immediate, not passive, dusty storage. He is protecting the secret by protecting the physical integrity of the sealed space. I ended the call quietly, my mind racing. The phone was cool against my ear, but the silence on the landing was hot with tension. The house was not empty. The attic was not benign. And my brother was compromised. I looked up at the smooth, dark wood of the door, the absence of shadow beneath it now feeling like a mocking painted smile. I wouldn't leave. I couldn't. I had to bypass the door and determine what Marcus and the house were hiding. The investigation had moved from a structural problem to a familial betrayal. I needed tools and I needed access. Marcus's brittle certainty had sealed the truth. The house held a secret, and he was actively guarding it. I knew the key to both the attic and my brother's silence lay in the past, specifically in the obsessive secrecy that defined my father's final years. My father had always been a man of rigid order, meticulously documenting his life. His study, locked and untouched since his passing, was the natural place to look for a breach in that order. The study was a preserved relic, cool and dark, smelling faintly of tobacco and aged paper. I used the spare key my mother had given me years ago, the brass cold and smooth in my hand. The light was muted, falling across a large, heavy mahogany desk. I bypassed the general clutter and went directly to the desk's central locked drawer, the place he kept his most protected documents. Inside, beneath a layer of old tax records, I found it. An old, heavy ledger. It was bound in dark green leather, its spine cracked, the pages thin and brittle. It wasn't a financial ledger. It was a personal record, a meticulous chronology of the house and its maintenance dating back decades. My father's handwriting, usually sharp and forceful, covered the pages, a quiet testament to his control over his world. I sat in his chair, the leather cool beneath me, and began to track the expenses. The early entries were dry, predictable. Roof repairs, garden upkeep, property tax payments. The chronology was perfect, a boring, steady record of a stable life. But as I moved into the later pages, the entries from the final year began to shift. They were smaller, more cryptic, and entirely inconsistent with the established maintenance patterns. They were labeled with unsettling vagueness, appearing with increasing frequency. Provisioning November 3rd. Reroute fee January 12th. The arrangement February 28th. These entries referred cryptically to provisions and the arrangement, but specified no recipient or supplier. There were no invoice numbers, no vendor names. A stark violation of my father's usual meticulous accounting. They were simply cash payments, marked only with the vague purpose. The entries suggested this arrangement was recent and deeply secret, kept off the official books and away from my mother's knowledge. The most chilling detail lay in the handwriting. In the final entries, leading up to the months immediately preceding his death, the script was noticeably shaky and faded. The penmanship, once so powerful and dominant, was now faint, hesitant, betraying a profound weakness. The letters were almost too large, struggling across the thin paper, suggesting they were written under duress or severe illness. The realization hit me. These entries documented a significant, ongoing, and entirely hidden expenditure, managed by my father right up until the point he could no longer physically hold the pen. The payment was not for structural repair. It was for the maintenance of a secret. The only explanation that fit the evidence, the barred attic door, Marcus's sudden lie, and the cryptic, sickly entries, was that my father was actively concealing someone or something in the house before he died. He was purchasing silence, resources, or necessities for a presence he could not acknowledge. The attic, the inaccessible space, was the obvious vault for this secret. The provisions were going to whomever was behind that barred door. And the arrangement was the financial structure put in place to ensure the secret remained contained after his death, a structure that Marcus, by virtue of his fear and denial, was now upholding. I closed the heavy green ledger, the cover cool and worn beneath my fingers. The book was no longer a symbol of domestic order. It was a ghostly record of coercion and concealment. My father hadn't died in peace. He had died guarding a secret that was active and expensive. And now I was forced to break that silence. The next step was clear. I had to understand the physical layout of the attic. I had to know where the air vents were, where the power line was tapped, and what kind of space the occupant was contained within. The ledger had provided the motive. Now I needed the blueprint. The realization that my father was secretly funding an unknown occupant, combined with Marcus's lie and the barricaded door, intensified the need for immediate, quiet entry. The attic door was not just locked, it was impassable. The standard, simple bolt on the exterior was an easy obstacle, but the inner bar, the unknown internal obstruction, made forcing the door impossible without destroying the century-old frame, which would trigger immediate suspicion from Marcus and the realtor. I retreated to the desk, not my father's, but the one I had used years ago when redesigning the house's interior layout. I pulled out my old architectural blueprints, faded rolls of paper documenting the house's original structure, and my proposed modifications. These were the only maps I had of my father's meticulously ordered, and now actively concealed, world. I spread the thick paper across the floor, the rustle of the parchment loud in the empty room. I followed the lines of the walls, the hidden pockets of space, searching for any inconsistency, any forgotten feature that could bypass the attic landing. The logical route was sealed. I needed the historical detour. My eyes traced the layout of the pantry, a small cold room tucked off the main kitchen. It was a space I rarely used, believing it to be simply a dusty storage annex. As I examined the early cross-sections, a feature I had completely forgotten surfaced. In the back wall of the pantry, the plans detailed an old, unused coal chute access panel. It was a small hinged metal door, typically used in houses of this vintage to dump coal directly into a lower storage area. I traced the vertical path of the chute on the blueprint. It was a narrow vertical shaft that led down, not to the main basement, but to a small obsolete storage space beneath the house's original rear staircase. Crucially, the blueprint showed that this low storage space was situated directly beneath the attic stairwell structure. The realization hit me with the force of structural collapse. The obsolete coal chute provided an alternative, hidden entry into the zone adjacent to the attic. It was a route that bypassed the locked landing entirely, using a forgotten piece of the house's utilitarian past. The question immediately shifted from if the attic could be accessed to how the access was achieved. The internal barrier on the attic door was positioned at the stairs. If the pantry chute led to the space beneath the stairs, the occupant would have a direct, unseen pathway to the floor above the landing, potentially right to the attic floor. Did someone use the obsolete chute to gain access to the attic unseen? The silence of the house seemed to answer with a chilling confirmation. The chute was forgotten, external, and far from the main entrance. It was the perfect hidden service entry for someone who needed to bring in provisions, without being seen by my mother or the cleaning crew. The sequence of events was now clear. Father's concealment. My father established the arrangement and provisions using the chute access. Occupant's entry. The occupant gained access to the house, and specifically the attic, using the old chute and the lower storage space. The barricade. The occupant barred the attic door from the inside to secure their location and prevent accidental discovery from the main house. Marcus's lie. Marcus, knowing or suspecting the occupant, lied to maintain the deception and protect the arrangement. The coal chute was not just an architectural feature. It was the implied access to the house's most dangerous secret. I rolled up the blueprints, the rough paper feeling like a map to a hidden kingdom. I was no longer fighting a locked door. I was following a hidden service tunnel. The next move was obvious. I had to go to the pantry, find the obsolete coal chute panel, and confirm that the secret life my father had funded was still active. The discovery transformed the attic from a mysterious vault into an urgent destination. The past had used the house's own forgotten infrastructure to hide its truth. Armed with the certainty provided by the blueprints, I went directly to the pantry, the forgotten space that held the secret of the house's hidden geography. The room was small, unheated, and felt entirely separate from the rest of the house. The air here was noticeably cooler, still clinging to the chill of the earth beneath the foundation. The room was cluttered with decades of quiet neglect. Rows of dusty ceramic jars and stacks of ancient, homemade preserves, fruit put up by my mother and grandmother, lined the rough wooden shelves. These were the mundane relics that had successfully obscured the architectural truth. I began the meticulous process of clearing the back wall. The glass jars clinked softly as I moved them, the sounds amplifying in the small space. The smell was initially just the expected aroma of stale cinnamon and aged fruit, a ghost of my mother's long-ago domesticity. Behind the last row of jars, partially obscured by a leaning stack of tins. I found it. The access panel. It was a small hinged metal door, flush with the wood paneling of the wall, its edges lined with grime and neglect. It was the obsolete coal chute access, a forgotten piece of the house's infrastructure. I put my hand near the seam of the panel. The air leaking from around the metal door was noticeably colder than the rest of the pantry, an unnatural, persistent draft that felt like it was drawn directly from deep beneath the house. This confirmed the shaft was a direct, active link to the subterranean structure. I knelt, placing my nose close to the cold metal seam, inhaling deeply. The scent was complex. First, the expected smells of the untouched house. Stale canvas from the old laundry bags stored nearby in dust, the dry, neutral scent of long-settled quiet. But beneath those familiar scents, there was something else. A sharp, distinct, and unsettling odor, metallic. It wasn't the smell of pure rust. It was a cleaner, more immediate industrial scent, like old engine grease or freshly cut copper. The presence of the metallic scent was a critical piece of evidence. It transformed the suspicion. The hidden occupant was not merely a vagrant seeking shelter, or a long-lost family member in hiding. The scent suggested activity, tools, mechanisms, or machinery. It tied the occupant directly back to the technical world implied by the provisions and the arrangement in my father's cryptic ledger. I realized the chilling ingenuity of the access point. The inner bar on the attic door must have been put in place by someone who accessed the attic not through the main staircase, but from this unusual secondary route. The sequence was now logically sound. The person used the hidden coal chute, the implied access, to reach the substairwell storage, which gave them direct access to the floor space near the barred attic door. They then barred the main door from the inside to prevent accidental discovery by anyone using the main house. The metallic scent, combined with the extreme cold of the draft, meant the hidden space was likely being used for more than just simple shelter. It was a workspace, likely related to the concealed expenses in my father's ledger. I pressed the tip of my finger against the seam of the cold metal panel. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, rushing sound of the cold, metallic-scented air leaking through the old hinges. The pantry, once a symbol of domestic routine, was now the front door to an active, hidden life. I had the access point and the clear confirmation of the occupant's nature, someone with tools and specialized needs. I pulled out the strongest screwdriver I had brought. The time for observation was over. I had to open the panel, brave the cold, dark shaft, and find out what kind of metal and machinery my father had spent his last, frail months concealing beneath our home. The act of opening the panel felt like a betrayal of my mother's quiet life, but a final, urgent necessity for my own truth. I resealed the coal chute panel, the cold, metallic scent still sharp on my fingers. The next step couldn't be a direct physical confrontation. I needed the human context for the provisions and the arrangement. The only eyes that might have pierced my father's secrecy belonged to Mrs. Chun, the elderly neighbor who lived directly across the street and possessed the patient, quiet observation of someone with time on their hands. I found Mrs. Chun in her sunroom, meticulously tending to a tray of small bonsai trees. The room was warm, filled with the clean, earthy scent of soil and damp moss. Her house, unlike mine, was alive and tended. She offered me tea and a polite, quiet attention that was difficult to penetrate. I steered the conversation gently, avoiding direct mention of the barred door or the bizarre metallic residue. I spoke only of my father, his final months, and the difficulty of settling the estate. I established a tone of shared history and quiet vulnerability. She was hesitant to speak, her silence a practiced form of protection. She was loyal to my father's memory and wary of breaking the quiet contract of neighborhood privacy. "Your father was a very private man, Leo," she murmured, trimming a tiny, vibrant green branch. "He liked his routines. No fuss." I paused, waiting until the silence felt heavy enough. I then introduced the anomaly. "Yes, he was. But I've noticed some strange small expenses in his ledger, near the end. Things that don't match his routine. Did you notice anything out of the ordinary at the house in the months before he passed?" Mrs. Chun kept her eyes on the bonsai, her movements steady. But the quiet intensity of her pruning became slower, more deliberate. She finally admitted to noticing one thing that broke the pattern of my father's orderly life: the truck. She described a distinctive beaten-up gray truck, The kind that looked like it had seen hard industrial use, parked down the street, usually 2 blocks away, late at night. She said she saw it a few times in the months before my father passed, always disappearing before dawn. It didn't belong here, she stated, her voice regaining a thread of quiet certainty. The engine was rough, and it was always watching your house. The observation was already damning, confirming a scheduled, covert operation. But then she revealed the crucial final piece of the sequence. And one night, she continued, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. A very foggy night in late autumn. I couldn't sleep. I looked out and I saw them. She specifically mentioned seeing 2 men, large, bulky silhouettes in the thick mist, moving quickly toward the house. They didn't use the front entrance. They were carrying something. They were carrying heavy, long objects, she said, her hands momentarily pausing above the bonsai. Wrapped in dark canvas. Too long for furniture. Too heavy for tools. They brought them into the house through the back door, near the kitchen, the one that leads straight to the pantry. The pieces slammed together, the implied access of the pantry, the metallic scent of the chute, the provisions of the ledger, and now the physical delivery of materials. This wasn't a vagrant. This was a planned, potentially criminal operation. The sheer effort involved in carrying heavy, long objects suggested machinery, components, or something that required a large, deliberate installation. The implied access was now a documented fact, complete with witnesses and cargo. The operation was complex, requiring at least 2 men and a specialized vehicle. Who were these 2 men? They were likely the suppliers or technicians, implied by the cryptic payments in the ledger, agents working for the powerful interests that Marcus was now so desperately protecting. What long objects were they storing? Given the metallic residue and David's research into geothermal energy, the objects were almost certainly the components for the prototype generator or the heat exchanger itself. Machinery designed for the subterranean installation accessible via the well shaft and the pantry chute. The initial mystery of the candle was now confirmed to be the final layer of a years-long operation of industrial-level concealment. I thanked Mrs. Chun, the tea forgotten. I walked out of her warm, bright sunroom and back into the cold reality of my silent house. The quiet community had not been blind. It had simply been reserved. The house was not a secret vault. It was a clandestine workspace built to house machinery. The evidence was overwhelming. My father was not simply concealing a person. He was concealing an installation. Marcus's fear was not of a ghost, but of the immense, powerful organization that had paid for the silence and delivered the machinery. I knew the next step could not involve local law enforcement. I was dealing with a planned operation of industrial espionage and concealment. I needed to move fast and quietly, just like the men in the gray truck. The attic was the place the machinery was stored. The well was the place it was installed. I needed to find the actual power source. The knowledge gained from Mrs. Chun, the confirmed clandestine delivery of heavy, long objects, shattered any remaining patience. I could no longer wait for Marcus or for some formal intervention. The attic was a high-stakes storage vault, and the time for observation was over. I returned to the second-floor landing with a small kit of tools, the carpet muffling the sound of my movement. The barred door, silent and dark, felt like the final, immediate barrier to the truth. I worked slowly, carefully, using a small wrench and screwdriver to unbolt the exterior lock. A standard aging bolt installed years ago. The screws were stiff with rust, protesting the disturbance, but they finally yielded with a soft metallic scrape. I slipped the bolt free, the metal cool and heavy in my hand. The main security was now bypassed. The only thing holding the door closed was the internal obstruction. I stood back, taking a deep breath of the stale, quiet air. I then applied gentle, slow pressure to the heavy wooden door, pushing it inward toward the stairwell. The door groaned faintly on its old hinges, moving perhaps an inch. Then it stopped abruptly, meeting the solid, absolute resistance of the internal barricade. Through the narrow vertical gap created between the door and the frame, I could finally see the defense. The heavy wooden bar, the source of the door's immobility and the absence of the light, was clear. It was a thick plank of wood, crudely wedged or bolted across the door, set tightly against the frame on the stairwell side. This confirmed the occupant's initial, primary intent: hiding and securing the space. But as I held the door steady, peering into the crack, my gaze dropped lower. Resting directly beneath the wooden bar, braced diagonally from the door to the opposite wall, was a second, thinner piece of metal. It was a long, dark pipe or rod, secured with evident haste, likely hammered into the baseboard or a crack in the frame. The double barrier, the wooden plank providing surface area and the metal rod providing structural rigidity, was a chilling testament to the occupant's state of mind. This was not the action of a simple stowaway seeking quiet sanctuary. The double barricade indicated severe intent. The occupant was not just hiding, they were desperately ensuring they could not be interrupted. The two pieces of material, one organic and one metallic, layered and braced, suggested a frenzied, high-stakes commitment to silence. The determination of the occupant was terrifying. They risked discovery by making noise to install the barricade, confirming that the potential cost of being interrupted was far greater than the risk of being heard. The metallic nature of the second bar tied the occupant back to the evidence in the ledger and the pantry. The industrial operation was not passive. It was active and fiercely protected. The person inside was a technician, a builder, or a guard, and they were protecting the machinery, not just their own safety. The chilling realization was that the door was barricaded not to keep someone out, but to prevent the occupant from being forced to surrender or to give up the machinery stored inside. It was a defensive measure against external coercion, perhaps against the very corporate interests that Marcus was so terrified of. I allowed the door to settle back gently against the frame. The small gap vanished, returning the landing to its deceptive quiet. I had gained crucial visual confirmation. The heavy wooden bar confirmed the hiding. The secondary metal rod confirmed the determination. The occupant was serious, professional, and terrified of being interrupted. I couldn't force the door without a full-scale assault that would destroy the frame and announce my presence to anyone inside. I had confirmed the location of the secret and the nature of the defense. Now, I had to use the implied access of the coal chute and the subterranean passage to gain silent entry and face the occupant on their own ground. The double barrier was the last warning. I had to assume the machinery was armed, or the occupant was desperate. The time for planning was over. The double barricade on the attic door and the knowledge of the industrial operation demanded immediate, silent access. I returned to the pantry, the cold, dry air smelling faintly of stale metal. I placed a screwdriver against the seam of the old coal chute panel. The hinges were stiff, protesting 7 decades of disuse, but with a sharp wrench, the metal door yielded, scraping loudly against the wooden frame. The opening revealed a black, narrow void. I grabbed my powerful, compact flashlight and clipped it to my collar, illuminating the dark shaft. The air that rushed out was cold, thick, and smelled intensely of mineral earth and that familiar, sharp metallic odor. I climbed through the narrow opening, forcing my body through the tight, dusty space. The rough edges of the metal chute scraped against my clothes, the sound muffled by the enclosed area. I dropped the few feet down into the cramped storage alcove. It was a low subterranean space, barely tall enough to crouch in, and the air here was heavy, undisturbed. The alcove was situated precisely where the blueprints had indicated, beneath the attic stairs. I was now inside the infrastructure of the house, in the hollow space that separated the foundation from the first floor, the Secret Service route my father had utilized. From the alcove, I could access the hollow space behind the vertical planking of the stairwell wall. I ran my hand over the rough wood, feeling the cold, rigid structure above me. The sound of my breathing was amplified in the tight confines. I retrieved the specialized tool I had brought, a small handheld camera on a telescoping stick. This was my quiet eye, designed to see without announcing my presence. I scanned the wood until I found what I was looking for. An old dark knot hole in the planking, perfectly positioned near the base of the attic stairs. I slid the lens of the camera stick slowly, carefully into the knot hole. The space beyond was utterly dark. I activated the camera's internal infrared light, and the screen on the handheld unit flickered to life. The view was grainy, distorted, but revealed the rough outline of the attic floor and the wall directly inside the barred door. I could see the thick shadow of the wooden bar, confirming its position across the interior frame. The camera view settled, scanning the small section of the floor visible near the door. My flashlight caught more than just the barricade. Scattered near the wall in the dim, dusty space were several telltale signs of long-term tenancy. Empty industrial-sized food tins, Large cans that suggested bulk purchases and non-perishable storage. The provisions detailed in my father's ledger. A small cluster of empty plastic water bottles. Not just one or two, but a collection suggesting systematic hydration over a period of weeks or months. The discovery provided a chilling confirmation. The occupant was not transient. They were established and prepared for a long stay. This wasn't a man who broke in last week. This was a man who had lived in the hidden space, sustained by my father, for months, perhaps years. The metallic scent now made brutal sense. The tins were industrial. The machinery had arrived. The occupant was settled in, guarding the contents of the vault. I slowly retracted the camera stick, pulling the lens back through the small knothole. The grainy image of the empty tins and water bottles was burned into my mind. The immediate danger was clear. I was only inches of wood away from the person who had been living secretly within the walls of my childhood home. The well-established nature of the tenancy meant two things. First, that Marcus's fear was justified. He was covering a major, long-term concealment. And second, that the occupant was likely nearby, perhaps watching the landing from the darkness, protected by their double barricade. I retreated from the cramped alcove, pulling myself back through the coal chute. I had achieved the breach. I had confirmed the barricade and the long-term tenancy. The next step was to use the occupant's trash, the empty food tins, to pinpoint the exact location of the subterranean energy source they were guarding. I was still crouching in the tight confines of the storage alcove, the air cold and thick with the scent of metal and long-term concealment. The grainy image of the occupant's empty food tins, captured through the knothole, was the last thing I needed to confirm the long-term tenancy. I was preparing to retreat, to formulate a plan that involved cutting a silent, structural hole into the attic space. And then the silence broke. From the other side of the vertical planking of the stairwell wall, the wall that separated my hidden position from the bottom of the attic stairs, I heard it. A small dry shuffling sound. It was faint, the distinct noise of cloth dragging or perhaps a heavy boot shifting slightly on the dusty floorboards. The sound was immediately adjacent to me, confirming the occupant was indeed established in the attic and likely sitting close to the barred door. The shock was immediate and paralyzing. The person was real, they were active, and they were only inches away. The quiet investigation instantly became a present, physical confrontation. I chose the direct approach. The time for subtlety was over. I needed to break the silence and assert my authority over the space. I pressed my face close to the rough wood planking, took a deep breath of the cold air, and whispered a single loud question that cut through the silence of the concealed space. "Who are you?" "The house is mine." The shuffling sound stopped instantly. The abrupt cessation of movement was more terrifying than the noise itself, signaling not panic, but immediate, sharp attention. The ensuing silence was tense, immense, filled only with the sound of my own shallow, fast breathing. I waited, every nerve ending screaming. After a moment that stretched painfully, a voice called back. It was low, rasping, and entirely unfamiliar. A voice damaged by disuse or age. And it was clearly male. The response was simple, chilling, and utterly composed. "I am waiting." The voice confirmed the occupant was not a terrified trespasser looking for an escape. It was a man expecting confrontation. The response was a statement of purpose, not a plea for mercy. The silence had been a vigil, and I had simply arrived at the end of the shift. I realized the profound, immediate danger. This man was prepared. He was guarding the machinery with a determined, high-stakes resolve, a resolve confirmed by the double barricade on the door. He wasn't hiding from the world. He was hiding for a purpose. The immediate questions that hit me were critical. What is the person waiting for? The go-ahead. He is likely waiting for a signal, a specific date, or a command from the powerful interests, the corporate entity, who funded the installation and delivered the provisions. He is an operative, not an owner. The key/the schematics. He may be waiting for someone to arrive with the final key to activate the geothermal prototype, or the missing technical data that Marcus's call was meant to retrieve. He is the guardian of a very valuable, inert weapon. Why stay even after Leo's father is dead? The arrangement is active. The arrangement in the ledger was not personal to my father. It was a contractual obligation paid for by the corporation. The funds and provisions continued even after my father passed, ensuring the silent vigil continued. Marcus's panic was based on the knowledge that he was now the one responsible for upholding this high-stakes, dangerous contract. Protecting the investment, the machinery, the heavy, long objects delivered in the gray truck, is the corporation's sole investment. The man is staying to guard the inert prototype until the corporate security team can safely retrieve the machinery or activate the source without drawing attention. The chilling conclusion was that the attic wasn't a static secret. It was a live, active security post. The man was a dedicated security guard, placed there by the same interests that Marcus was now so terrified of. I did not reply. The low, rasping voice had stripped away the final layers of ambiguity. This was a direct corporate confrontation. I had exposed myself, but I had gained the critical confirmation. The man was alone, waiting and willing to speak. I slowly backed away from the knothole, the sound of my movement deliberately muffled. I retreated into the dark crawl space, pulling myself carefully back toward the coal chute. I had the confirmation of a hostile, expecting presence. I needed to extract myself silently and immediately contact Marcus. His silence was my only remaining leverage against the active threat that was now fully aware of my presence. The time for quiet investigation was over. The game had moved from surveillance to negotiation. I retreated quickly from the coal chute, scrambling back through the tight space and resecuring the metal panel with trembling hands. The rasping voice, "I am waiting," was a chilling presence in the quiet house. I was no longer alone in this investigation. The occupant was real, established, and fully aware of my intrusion. The time for silent detection was over. I needed the one person who knew the truth behind the fear, Marcus. I called my brother immediately. I bypassed the accusations, presenting only the cold, undeniable facts of the past hour. The immovable door, the empty provision tins seen through the camera, the double barricade, and finally, the low male voice that confirmed the man was waiting inside. I spoke with the calm, flat authority of an architect presenting a structural failure report. The line was silent for a long moment. Then Marcus's composure finally broke. His initial defensiveness dissolved into a shaky, profound weariness, the sound of a man released from an immense 7-month vigil. "Stop, Leo," he choked out. "Just stop. You're right. I'm sorry." He confessed the truth, the secret he had been tasked with guarding since our father's passing. The man in the attic was not a corporate operative or a vagrant. He was an old friend of our father, a disgraced former colleague named Elias. Elias was a highly intelligent but ultimately ruined engineer. Decades ago, he was caught up in a complex scandal involving corporate espionage and the theft of intellectual property. He was a wanted man, hiding from both corporate interests seeking revenge and authorities seeking prosecution. Our father, who had been Elias's closest ally during their early careers, felt responsible for the circumstances that led to Elias's downfall, a decades-long debt that transcended mere friendship. Our father had been sheltering him in the attic vault, using the obscure access points and funding his existence through the cryptic provisions entries in the ledger. Marcus admitted he had inherited this role of supplier and protector after our father's death. He had been maintaining the silence, the secrecy, and the scheduled provisions, terrified of the consequences should the arrangement be exposed. Marcus confirmed the physical details I had observed. The wooden bar. Marcus himself had put the wooden bar in place, doing so during his inspection 3 days ago. It was a measure he took to secure the space immediately after a particularly unsettling call he received, likely from a corporate entity checking on the status of the arrangement. The metallic pipe. The metallic pipe forming the second, inner barricade was put there by Elias himself. Elias recognized the wooden bar was insufficient against a determined intruder, and augmented the security using materials he had stored inside. The double barrier was a sign of Elias's own acute fear and professional preparedness, confirming his status as a desperate fugitive. The truth revealed a deep, agonizing familial burden, but it left 2 profound questions unanswered. What was the debt owed? The precise nature of the debt remains hidden. Was it financial, moral, or did our father believe he had actively betrayed Elias in the past? Given Elias's focus on secrecy and industrial theft, the debt likely involves a shared secret from their engineering careers. A secret linked to the very technology the corporation now seeks. Is the occupant a victim or a criminal? Elias is simultaneously a fugitive criminal, wanted by authorities for espionage, and a victim, hiding from powerful corporate interests. His current status is an agonizing mix of both, a consequence of past actions that our father felt compelled to shield him from. The occupant is waiting because his silence is the only remaining leverage, and his safety relies entirely on the successful concealment of his location. Marcus's voice was heavy with the terror of this inheritance. He confirmed the simple, chilling reality. The house sale must stop. We were now responsible for the immense, dangerous secret our father had left behind. I hung up the phone, the receiver heavy in my hand. Marcus had supplied the name and the context. The arrangements were clear. The provisions were for Elias. I knew my next step could not be to force the door. It had to be to negotiate. I had to convince Elias that I was not a corporate operative, that I understood the depth of the debt, and that he needed to surrender the hidden machinery before the corporation found the house's vulnerable spots. The burden of our father's silence was now fully transferred to us. The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus stood on the landing, pale but resolute, finally facing the physical barrier he had tried to ignore. His presence was crucial. A shared burden, a necessary witness. The plan was not to attack, but to resolve the situation legally and humanely, ending the painful decades-long arrangement that had haunted the house. I retrieved the largest crowbar from the utility closet. The antique frame of the door deserved a quiet, structural death, but the time for subtlety was long past. Marcus braced the frame, his hands tight against the cold wood, offering a final silent apology to our father's ghost. I positioned the crowbar against the jamb, found the point of maximum leverage, and applied my full weight. The release was violent. The wooden frame groaned in protest, but it was the interior wooden bar that gave way, snapping with a deafening crack that echoed sharply down the empty stairwell. The sound was brutal, absolute, destroying the delicate peace of the house and announcing the end of the secret. The door flew inward, crashing against the dusty floorboards of the attic. A cloud of fine, decades-old dust billowed out, catching the light from the landing window. We stood on the landing, peering into the dusty, quiet space. The attic was exactly as Marcus had described. Storage boxes, moth-eaten furniture, and the dim, high-angled light filtering through the small vents. But near the center, sitting patiently in a metal folding chair, was the man, Elias. He was old, smaller than the figure I had imagined, and profoundly weary, his face etched with the lines of long confinement and deep anxiety. He made no move toward us. He didn't even flinch at the sound of the door breaking. He simply looked up, his expression one of tired inevitability. He was not dangerous. He was exhausted. Beside him, resting on a small makeshift table crafted from a storage box, was the reason for the arrangement. A complex, cobbled-together radio communication device. Wires ran discreetly along the baseboards, leading to the roof vent, the source of the reroute fee in our father's ledger. Elias spoke, his rasping voice tired but precise. He explained he had been waiting for news of a successful legal appeal he'd been tracking. The news item was his key to freedom. A final conditional victory that would clear his name of the corporate espionage charges, allowing him to return to a legitimate life. He revealed that their father, unable to help Elias directly with the legal battle or finance his defense, had promised him one thing, that he would deliver the news of the appeal's success the moment it happened. The arrangement was not just a debt of shelter. It was a commitment to information delivery. Our father had been Elias's private, silent courier, receiving and relaying crucial legal updates through a secure, discreet channel. I realized the profound, tragic truth. The house was not empty, but filled with his father's final, silent, desperate loyalty. Our father hadn't left a burden of malice, but a burden of unending obligation. He died before he could deliver the final news, the appeal outcome, leaving Elias suspended in an endless vigil. The secret was fully exposed. A man hidden in our attic, waiting for a legal outcome that our deceased father was meant to deliver. How will Leo and Marcus handle the release of their father's secret? And the silent guest who has now been exposed? Immediate human and legal resolution. Elias. The immediate priority is Elias's legal status. Leo will use the established contacts, likely legal or technical associates from his architectural network, to verify the status of the legal appeal that Elias was tracking. Marcus, as the executor and holder of the arrangement, will handle the human element, ensuring Elias's immediate safety and comfort. They will not turn him over to the authorities without first understanding the current legal standing of the corporate charges versus the espionage charges. The family debt is paid through final, decisive action, not continued silence. Addressing the corporate threat. The geothermal installation is the primary threat. They must assume the corporate entity is still watching. Marcus will continue the pretense of the house sale to draw out the corporate security team, while Leo works with Gregory, if contact is made, to ensure the technical data, the drive, is safely secured and possibly leaked to a neutral public entity like a major university, to negate the corporate leverage. The house will not be sold until the subterranean installation is safely neutralized or publicly acknowledged. Reconciling the father's legacy. Leo and Marcus must reconcile the image of their pragmatic father with the man who risked everything for a decades-old promise. They will choose to honor the loyalty and compassion inherent in his final, painful act, rather than the secrecy that caused their distress. The house becomes a monument not to a hidden lie, but to a profound, complicated friendship. I lowered the crowbar, letting the heavy tool fall silently to the rug. The silence in the attic was heavy, waiting for us to choose the ending. I looked at Marcus. We didn't need words. We had inherited a profound, dangerous loyalty. We had found not a criminal or a ghost, but a tired man waiting for the end of a long journey. The waiting is over, Elias, I said, my voice gentle. We're going to get you the news. Did you enjoy the story? And from which city are you listening? Tell me in the comments. I always love hearing from you. If this story touched your heart, you can support me with a super thanks. Your support helps me continue creating more stories for you. 2 more beautiful life stories are on your screen right now. I hope you enjoy them too. There's so much more waiting for you on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.